Works. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Studio C70 event, and our special guest for this half hour is Beth Schwanke, who is the Executive Director of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute for Cyber Law, Policy, and Security, where she has served as the Executive Director since 2017. My name is Jeff Greenberg. I am a Senior Advisor on Election Administration with the Committee of 70. And I have to say this, Beth, because where you work, University of Pittsburgh is my favorite when it comes to their athletic team. So I've been a lifetime Pitt fan. So it's always a pleasure and privilege to interview somebody from the University of Pittsburgh.
I love to hear it and hail the Pitt. But happy election day, Jeff.
Yes, same to you. So hopefully it will be a quiet one across the Commonwealth. But we do obviously have some very important issues to discuss today that may impact us in some way today, but also more importantly as we head towards the November election in the fall. So these are some really good issues. So um, first of all, is there anything that you'd like to, as far as your personal um, professional experience, describe as far as your focus beyond what I mentioned in your intro? So if any of the focuses that you have, that would be helpful.
Sure. So at PittCyber, actually, all the way back in 2018, we began hosting the Blue Ribbon Commission on Pennsylvania's election security. And so I staffed that commission, which has since wrapped up its work. But that was kind of my introduction into a lot of these issues. And then at PittCyber, we also host the Pitt Disinformation Lab, which looks at Western Pennsylvania specifically and a little bit more broadly as well, and kind of our information resilience. So as you might expect, a lot of that work has also focused on elections and how we are and aren't sharing good information about our election administration in Pennsylvania.
So let's go ahead and get into our questions. So looking ahead, what are your priorities and goals for the future of elections as voters head to the polls, up just for the future of elections?
Yeah. Well, look, I think all of Pennsylvania wants the same things today, right? First, we want anyone who is eligible to vote to be able to vote. And second, we all want to be confident that our elections are safe and secure, that we can trust in our election results. And so, one of the ways we can really address that, besides, of course, having safe and secure elections, is to also ensure that there's a lot of reliable, trustworthy information out there that people can access so they can understand what goes on in our elections. Because let's be honest, it is incredibly complex, as you know more than anyone, Jeff. It is not easy, and there are so many points in the process where human error can play a role, where incomplete information can be incredibly confusing, and where events are just changing really rapidly. And so it's really important that all of our election officials and nonpartisan actors, our newspapers, all of these groups have the ability to really play a role in providing trustworthy, reliable information about our elections.
What are some of the measures that Pennsylvania has implemented to ensure the integrity and security of the electoral process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because of course, right, in addition to actually sharing that trustworthy information about our elections, we need to make sure our elections are in fact trustworthy, right? That's number one job. And one of the most important things that Pennsylvania does for our election security is that we now require the use of voting systems that produce a voter verifiable paper ballot. And I know it sounds funny that paper is the state-of-the-art technology, right? But it allows a paper trail. And so there's no better security measure. People might remember that prior to the 2020 elections, most counties were actually using DRE machines. And so that meant we didn't have paper trails to actually really verify our votes. And so when PittCyber convened the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission on Pennsylvania's election security, switching to voter verified paper-based systems was our #1 recommendation to improve Pennsylvania's election security. And now every county uses those paper-based systems. Now, that's far from the only thing that the state and the counties do to secure our votes, but I think it's worth us highlighting because it's so critical and also because it's been a big change over the past several elections. Another really important thing that the paper ballots actually allow the state to do is to conduct risk limiting audits. So that's the gold standard of an audit for elections. Basically, it uses statistical methods to confirm election outcomes, and also that means to detect the possibility of interference. So officials examine a random sample of paper ballots and compare the votes on paper to the totals reported by the machine, ensuring it's correct. And all Pennsylvania counties have to participate in a statewide risk limiting audit for every primary and general election, beginning in the general for 2022. And actually, people can watch the RLA, the risk limiting audit, online. So really, I think, what we should all know is that the state and the counties are constantly and consistently improving election security, but it's really not a race with an endpoint. It's something that we need to do for every election, all of the time.
I agree. So another big area, obviously, that's kind of risen in the last few years, more so than even when I was in my position in Mercer County, is misinformation and disinformation. And they have provided significant challenges in recent elections, not only to election officials, but to voters as well. How are we in Pennsylvania addressing those issues to ensure voters have access to accurate and reliable information? And what strategies might be employed to combat these challenges ahead in the fall?
Yeah. So, on the one hand, misinformation and disinformation in politics is nothing new. But false information calling into question the reliability of our elections is something that I think feels very new to us in the United States and is really frightening, right? And it's not just something online. There are impacts on the ground. False information about election fraud led to the attacks on the US Capitol on January 6th. It's led to very real threats against our election officials. And I think false and misleading information about our elections is also creating just this generalized distrust in our elections, our election results, our election officials, and our very democracy, right? And that is incredibly damaging. So to your question, like, what should Pennsylvania do about that? So the most important thing right now and today is that our 67 counties continue to run safe and secure elections. But that is not enough, right? Our elections can be secure, but if people don't believe that our elections are trustworthy, that's a big problem. And so we do need to make sure that Pennsylvania residents and the nation, right, trust our election results. So, like we were talking about, like you've said, one of the most important things our state and local governments can do is to ensure that all residents have access to accurate, trustworthy information about our election administration. And, we should want people to know how our elections work so that they can have confidence in them, right? I mean, the more you learn about our elections, I think the more you realize how many layers of security there really are. And so I hope we'll continue to see expansion of efforts around ensuring that people have good information. There is a lot of really good information on the Pennsylvania Department of State website, including a voter education toolkit. And there's also another really great resource on the DOS website. It's labeled Fact Checking Pennsylvania Related Election Claims. I'm pretty sure I have that right. And what it does is it takes a look at some of the false and misleading claims that we see about our elections and helps give people the context and information that they need to understand why those claims are misleading. And most importantly, like what the accurate information is. And I'm expecting that we'll see that resource kind of updated throughout now in the fall as new claims continue to emerge or to be recycled. There's a lot of other great resources too. Secretary Schmidt started regular public briefings that are streamed on the Department of State website, on Facebook. I also hope we'll start to see a lot more and continued efforts from our county election officials to increase their communication with the public. And then outside of government, one of our most important resources is our good local news. I have been seeing great reporting from newspapers across the Commonwealth, and not just newspapers, media outlets, that is helping people understand our elections, not just the campaigns, but like the actual nitty-gritty of how our election administration does and doesn't work.
And that when now that you mentioned that, you realize how much that was missing over the years. Now that we're seeing it, it's so much more common for media outlets to focus on the X's and O's of elections and election administration. And 10 years ago, it was, other than reporting coverage of the election itself and if there were election day problems, that was very rare. So that I agree with you 100% that that's a
Yeah.
huge improvement.
I think that's right. It's been a really a good change, but I think that also points to just how much the information environment around elections has changed. People weren't really paying attention because everyone kind of just trusted that it worked and that our election officials were doing the right things. And now that people are paying attention in very different ways, we realize that actually there was a bit of an information vacuum. And so we need to make sure, because we need to make sure to fill that information vacuum with reliable information, because when you do have a vacuum, that's where bad information can really get in and seep in.
So we've talked a little bit about working together and collaborating. In another way, collaboration is also a key in addressing cybersecurity threats. What partnerships has Pennsylvania established to enhance election security measures, not only for the primary, but for the fall? And how will these partnerships evolve as we move forward?
Yeah, so information sharing is critical to meeting any threat, right? You don't know what you don't know. And particularly after the 2016 elections, I think federal, state, local officials all realized that there hadn't been enough information sharing in the election space. So earlier this year, the governor established the Pennsylvania Election Threats Task Force, which helps make information sharing about potential threats easier. So it includes federal, state, local partners sharing information to help meet any threats to the election process. So it includes representatives from county election directors, U.S. Attorney's Office, Pennsylvania State Police, Pennsylvania National Guard. So it's really building on a previous interagency work group, but now is including local officials, which is really important, and law enforcement. So I think we should anticipate that the partnership is going to evolve as threats evolve, right? Ideally, it will evolve to meet the threats. I will be keeping an eye out for kind of any after actions on what the task force has been able to accomplish and what it plans to continue to do to improve information sharing, particularly as we're heading into the general this year.
Yeah, I agree. As voters participate in the primary today, can you talk about any initiatives or campaigns that Pennsylvania has launched or other parts of organizations in Pennsylvania have launched to educate voters about the importance of discerning credible sources and fact-checking information? And again, how do you think those will help us as we move towards the fall?
Yeah, I think all of these initiatives are super crucial, right? For all of the reasons we talked about before. I've been pleased to see that the Department of State is really embracing what I think is now one of its most important roles, which is just ensuring that voters do have access to trustworthy information about our elections. And they're recognizing that this isn't something that can just happen on the day of the election or the week of an election, right? It is a year-round effort. So we talked a moment ago that the Department of State's website has really great resources, right? That's votepa.gov. There's also a voter hotline. County election office websites have good information too. There's a big voter education initiative going on from DOS. I think a lot of folks have been seeing the graphics online about where, when to vote, things like that. And the election threats task force that we talked about, right? Disinformation can be a threat. So they will be working to make sure that voters have accurate, trusted election information. There's also a training program now for county election directors that should also help ensure that they are better equipped to share accurate information with voters. Um, and it's also really important that we as voters do our part, right? Vote today if you haven't already, but we should also be aware that elections are a time where bad actors can really try to get you to see false information to break down trust in our election processes and in our democracy. It's also a time where there's a lot of things in flux. There might not be full information. There's a lot of information pollution, information noise. So around and on election day, I try to be really careful in how I engage online and in what sources I use to get my own information. So the most reliable sources of information about elections are going to be the Department of State, our county election offices. Oh, and actually, there's a new election night returns website from DOS that is available starting now, although there's not any
I
information
was
on there
surprised to
now.
see that today. I
Yeah.
did not know that was coming.
Yeah, I will be looking at it closely. I think it'll be really, I like the updates to the design. Um, so that actually can be really useful too. Making sure, for example, that people understand that these are unofficial results, that they can change, things like that is super crucial. Uh, and especially as we head into November, where it might just take a little bit longer than one might expect tonight. Um, I also rely on news outlets that adhere to professional journalism standards. We're so lucky in Pennsylvania to have lots of great media outlets that have been doing really thoughtful reporting about how elections work in Pennsylvania. And that's been a change, as you pointed out. Like one example, I find Spotlight PA's partnership with VoteBeat to be really
Yeah.
valuable. And there are lots of other great examples like that. I, of course, also find, organizations that are nonpartisan, like Committee of 70, that put out some really helpful resources. I use those too. And so using those good sources, and if you're someone that shares information online, sharing from those good sources and not other sources that might not be as reliable, that's going to be the most effective thing that people can do to avoid misinformation themselves, but also to help others avoid it too.
Well, that's all we have for today, Beth. So I appreciate your time and your efforts to assist elections in Pennsylvania. So it's a wonderful effort. When I think about how far we've come, I served as an election official from 2007 to 2020, and basically for the first 10 years, we wouldn't have even known what the word cybersecurity was until about 2016. And it's just rapidly increased the importance of understanding that world. So it is amazing how far we've come in such a short time.
Yeah, and I think, look, we can all be confident that our election officials are keeping our results secure. And I think, it is something that'll continue to evolve. And so I'm glad there is so much attention to it now. It's great.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully you will enjoy the rest of your primary election day in comfort, and look forward to seeing you down the road. Thank you.
You too, Jeff. Thanks.
You have a great day.
You too.